Hello students, welcome to Science Notes SEE. In this channel, I will explain every topic from class 10 in a very simple way so that you can understand the chapter easily. After completing each chapter, we will also solve exercises in another video, so stay tuned. Today, we are going to learn Unit 1 of class 10, which is Scientific Learning. In this video, we will mainly focus on important questions that can come in the final examination, and I will try to explain everything in a very simple form. Now students, first of all, what are variables? Variables are traits or conditions that can be changed or varied in an experiment. In simple words, variables are those factors that we can change or we can measure or change during an experiment. For example, in a science laboratory experiment, let's imagine this situation. हामीले एउटा गुलेली क्याटापल्ट प्रयोग गरेर ढुङ्गा कति टाढा जान्छ भन्ने एक्सपेरिमेन्ट गर्न खोजिरहेका छौं. Now in this experiment, what can we change? We can change the force we apply on the catapult, we can change how much we stretch it, and we can also observe how far the stone travels. So these are variables. So students, variables are those factors or conditions that can be changed or varied in an experiment. Now let's talk about types of variables. Variables are mainly of three types. First, independent variable. Second, dependent variable. Third, controlled variable. Now students, what is independent variable? Independent variable is the factor or condition that we change in an experiment. It is also called the input variable. In simple words, it is what we change. For example, in our catapult experiment, if we change the force applied, then force is the independent variable, because we are changing it. Now, what is dependent variable? Dependent variable is the factor or condition that we measure or observe in an experiment. In simple words, it is what we measure. For example, in the same experiment, we measure how far the stone travels. So the distance traveled by the stone is the dependent variable, because we are measuring it. Now students, what is controlled variable? Controlled variables are the factors or conditions that we keep same throughout the experiment. These are important because they help us get an unbiased result. If we change everything at the same time, we cannot find a proper relationship between variables. So, controlled variables must be remain constant. In Nepali, हामीले केही चीजहरु constant राख्नुपर्छ ताकि सही result आउन सकोस्. Now let's understand with examples. Example 1. Effect of water temperature on sugar dissolving. In this experiment, we study the effect of water temperature on how sugar dissolves. Now students, what are we changing? We are changing the temperature of water. For example, at 20 degrees Celsius, sugar takes 2 minutes 30 seconds to dissolve. At 40 degrees Celsius, it takes 1 minute 20 seconds. And at 60 degrees Celsius, it takes only 40 seconds. So clearly, we are changing temperature. So temperature of water is the independent variable. Now, what are we measuring? We are measuring the time taken for sugar to dissolve. So time taken is the dependent variable. Now students, what must we keep same? We must keep amount of sugar same, amount of water same, and type of sugar same. Because if we change these, the result may become biased. So these are controlled variables. Example 2. Effect of fertilizer on plant growth. Now another example. We are studying the effect of amount of fertilizer on plant growth. Now what are we changing? We are changing the amount of fertilizer. For example, 0 gram, 5 gram and 10 gram. So fertilizer amount is the independent variable. Now what are we measuring? We are measuring the height of the plant. So plant height is the dependent variable, because we are observing it and measuring it. Now students, what should we keep constant? We must keep type of plant, size of pot, type of soil, and amount of water. These must remain the same so that the experiment is fair. So these are controlled variables. Now students, remember this simple trick. What we change is independent variable. What we measure is dependent variable. What we keep same is controlled variable. Now students, let's move on to the next slide. Here, we will learn how to identify variables in different experiments. This is very important for exams because similar questions are frequently asked. So let's understand step by step. Experiment 1. I wanted to find the effect of increased sunlight on the height of a sunflower plant. Now students, look carefully at the question. Whenever we see effect of something on something, we can get a clue about variables. In this case, we are changing sunlight. We are increasing sunlight or decreasing sunlight. So the amount of sunlight is the independent variable. Now what are we measuring? We are measuring the height of the sunflower plant. So height of the plant is the dependent variable because we are observing it and measuring it. Now what should we keep constant? We must keep some factors same to get a fair result. For example, type of plant, soil, water and temperature. These are control variables. Now students, here is an important trick. In most cases, what comes after effect of is the independent variable. But remember, this is not 100%, but in most exam questions it works. Now experiment 2. Let's take another example. A student wanted to find the effect of concentration of acid on the rate of reaction with zinc metal. Now students, what are we changing? We are changing the concentration of acid. So concentration of acid is the independent variable. Now what are we measuring? We are measuring the rate of reaction with zinc metal. So rate of reaction is the dependent variable. Now students, what should we keep constant? We must keep amount of zinc and other experimental conditions same so that the result is not biased. Now experiment 3. Now another example. Sita wanted to investigate the effect of temperature on the solubility of sugar in water. Now students, what are we changing? We are changing temperature. So temperature is the independent variable. Now what are we measuring? We are measuring how much sugar dissolves in water. So solubility of sugar is the dependent variable. Now experiment 4. Now let's take the final example. Hari wanted to investigate the effect of length of wire on resistance in an electric circuit. Now students, what are we changing? We are changing the length of the wire. So length of the wire is the independent variable. Now what are we measuring? We are measuring electrical resistance. So resistance is the dependent variable. Now students, what should we keep constant? We must keep type of wire, thickness of wire, cross-sectional area and temperature. These are controlled variables. Now students, let's move on to the next topic. First of all, what is a physical quantity? Physical quantities are those quantities that can be measured. In simple words, if something can be measured using an instrument or unit, then it is called a physical quantity. For example, length, mass, speed, force, pressure, temperature. All these things can be measured. So these are physical quantities. But students, can we measure happiness? Can we measure sadness? Can we measure anger? No, we cannot measure them properly using instruments. So these are not physical quantities. Now let's move to fundamental quantities. Fundamental quantities are the basic quantities that do not depend on other quantities. In simple words, if a quantity can exist independently by itself, then it is called a fundamental quantity. Examples are length, mass, time, electric current, temperature, amount of substance, and luminous intensity. These are fundamental quantities. Why? Because they do not depend on other quantities. For example, does time depend on another quantity? No. Does mass depend on another quantity? Again no. So these are called fundamental quantities. Now students, the units of these quantities are called fundamental units. For example, meter is the unit of length, kilogram is the unit of mass, and second is the unit of time. These are fundamental units. Now let's move to derived quantities. Derived quantities are those quantities that are formed by combining two or more fundamental quantities. Similarly, derived units are formed by combining two or more fundamental units. Let's understand this with an example. To calculate speed, we need distance and time. Distance has unit meter and time has unit second. So the unit of speed becomes meter per second. Since it is formed using two fundamental units, speed is called a derived quantity. Another example is acceleration. To calculate acceleration, we need change in velocity and time. So acceleration also depends on other quantities. That is why acceleration is called a derived quantity. Some common examples of derived quantities are area, volume, speed, acceleration, force, work, pressure, and density. You can also see these examples clearly in the table. So students, remember one simple trick. If a quantity does not depend on other quantities, then it is a fundamental quantity. And if a quantity depends on other quantities, then it is a derived quantity. Now students, let's move on to some very important questions. These questions are frequently asked in examinations for 2 marks, so you must understand them properly. Now students, we already learned that derived units are those units which depend on 2 or more fundamental units. Now let's see why the unit of work is called a derived unit. First of all, what is the SI unit of work? It is joule. And what is the formula of work? Work equals force multiplied by distance. Now students, we know that force is equal to mass multiplied by acceleration. So instead of force, we can write mass multiplied by acceleration. That means work equals mass multiplied by acceleration multiplied by distance. Now let's substitute the units. Unit of mass is kilogram. Unit of acceleration is meter per second
square. And unit of distance is meter. So, after substituting the units, we get kilogram multiplied by meter per second square multiplied by meter. Now, after simplifying, we get kilogram meter square per second square. Now, students, we can clearly see that the unit of work depends on kilogram, meter, and second. Since it is formed by combining fundamental units, the unit of work is called a derived unit. Now, let's move to another important question. Why is the unit of acceleration called a derived unit? We know that acceleration equals velocity divided by time. Now, students, what is the unit of velocity? It is meter per second. And the unit of time is second. So, after substituting the units, we get meter per second divided by second. Now, after simplifying, we get meter per second square. So, students, the unit of acceleration depends on meter and second. Therefore, acceleration is also a derived quantity, and its unit is a derived unit. Now, students, let's move to another very important topic. That is unit-wise analysis. This topic is very important for numericals and checking formulas. Now, what is unit-wise analysis? Unit-wise analysis is a method of checking or finding the unit of a physical quantity by using its formula. In simple words, we check whether a physical equation is correct or not by comparing the units on both sides. Now, let's understand the steps of unit-wise analysis carefully. First step, ignore numerical values and constants. This is very important, students. While doing unit-wise analysis, we ignore numbers like 1, 2, 3, 4, and constants like pi. We only focus on physical quantities and their units. Second step, replace every physical quantity with its SI unit. For example, velocity becomes meter per second. Acceleration becomes meter per second square. Force becomes Newton, and so on. So, students, for unit-wise analysis, you must remember physical quantities and their units properly. Third step, solve the units carefully. Now, students, after replacing the units, we solve them using multiplication or division. Remember one important thing. In unit-wise analysis, we cannot directly add or subtract different units. For example, meter per second plus meter per second, this is correct because both units are same. But meter plus meter per second, this is incorrect because the units are different. Similarly, kilogram per meter square plus kilogram per meter square, this is correct. But kilogram plus meter per second square, this is incorrect because the units are different. Now, students, the final step. If the units on the left-hand side and right-hand side are equal, then the equation is unit-wise correct. But if the units do not match, then the equation is unit-wise incorrect. Now, students, let's solve some equations using unit-wise analysis. In unit-wise analysis, our main goal is to check whether a physical equation is correct or not by comparing the units on both sides. So, let's solve some examples step by step. First equation, v equals u plus a multiplied by t. Now, students, first of all, we write the unit of every physical quantity. Here, v means final velocity, u means initial velocity, a means acceleration, and t means time. Now, let's substitute their units. Unit of velocity is meter per second. Unit of acceleration is meter per second square. Unit of time is second. So, after replacing the units, we get meter per second equals meter per second plus meter per second square multiplied by second. Now, students, in the last term, second cancels with second. So we get meter per second equals meter per second plus meter per second. Now, we can clearly see that all terms have the same unit, meter per second. So, this equation is unit-wise correct. Now, let's move to the second equation. V square equals u square plus 2 multiplied by a multiplied by s. Again, we first write the units of all quantities. Velocity has unit meter per second. Acceleration has unit meter per second square. Displacement has unit meter. So, after substituting the units, we get meter per second whole square equals meter per second whole square plus 2 multiplied by meter per second square multiplied by meter. Now, students, remember one important thing. In unit-wise analysis, we ignore numerical values and constants. So, we remove the number 2. Now, after simplifying, we get meter square per second square equals meter square per second square plus meter square per second square. Again, all terms have the same unit, so this equation is also unit-wise correct. Now, students, from these examples, we understand one important thing. First, identify all physical quantities correctly. Second, write their SI units carefully. Third, ignore numerical values and constants. Fourth, solve the units carefully step by step. And finally, units on both sides must be equal. If the units are equal, the equation is correct. If the units are different, the equation is incorrect. Now, students, let's check another equation. S equals u times t plus a times t. Again, we substitute the units. Unit of displacement is meter. Unit of velocity is meter per second. Unit of time is second. Unit of acceleration is meter per second square. So, after replacing the units, we get meter equals meter per second multiplied by second, plus meter per second square multiplied by second. Now, solving step by step, in the first term, second cancels with second, so we get meter. In the second term, only 1 second cancels, so we get meter per second. So the final result becomes meter equals meter plus meter per second. Now, students, look carefully. On the left-hand side, we have meter, but on the right-hand side, we have meter plus meter per second. The units are different, and we already learned that different units cannot be added together. So this equation is unit-wise incorrect. Now, students, remember these important rules. First, identify all physical quantities correctly. Second, write their SI units carefully. Third, ignore numerical values and constants. Fourth, solve the units carefully step by step. And finally, units on both sides must be equal. If the units are equal, the equation is correct. If the units are different, the equation is incorrect. Now, students, we covered almost all important question types from this chapter. In the next video, I will try to bring simple explanations of the remaining concepts and solved exercises from the chapter. As our channel name says, Science Notes, I will try to provide easy notes and solved exercises for every chapter so that you can prepare better for examinations. First, we will understand the chapter in a simple way, and then we will solve exercises step by step. So stay tuned and thank you for watching.